The shears closed an inch from Cordelia Ashbourne's ear, and a hand-length of dark chestnut hair fell across the dressing-table mirror, like a curtain coming loose from its rod. She did not flinch. Flinching would have moved the blade, and Lady Marjorie Ashbourne had never been a woman to apologize for clumsiness when she could blame the person beneath her wrist instead. "Hold still, child." Marjorie's voice was light, almost cheerful, the kind of voice a woman uses to instruct a maid laying a fire. She gathered another long lock between her thumb and forefinger and lifted it as if assessing the quality of cloth at a draper's. The shears bit again. Another length of Cordelia's hair slid silently down the silk of her wrapper and joined the first on the floor. "His Grace will be on our drive in 2 hours," Marjorie said, working her way around the back of Cordelia's head with the patient efficiency of a gardener pruning a bush that had grown too prosperous. "I should be very sorry, Cordelia, if anyone were to think that this house had presented him with a bride. It will spare us all an embarrassment." Cordelia counted. She had begun counting at the first cut, and she would count until the last one, because counting was a thing her father had taught her to do, when she felt the small, hot animal in her chest demand a response she could not afford. 6, 7, 8. Each length of hair fell with the soft sound of a page being turned in a book no one was meant to read. The autumn light through the bedroom window was the pale, level light of a Wiltshire afternoon at the end of October. It made the strands on the floor look almost black against the rose and cream Aubusson carpet her father had carried back from France the year before the world stopped being kind to him. She watched her own face in the mirror with the dispassionate interest she might have brought to a stranger's. Grey eyes. A mouth that her father had once told her resembled her mother's. A line of jaw that even cropped hair could not disguise. She was 26 years old, and tomorrow she would still be 26 years old, and her stepmother had not yet understood that hair was the least of what she had to lose. "There," said Marjorie, stepping back. She set the shears down on the dressing table beside Cordelia's silver brushes, where they gleamed like a small, well-bred predator at rest. "Much more sensible. You will pass for a governess, which is approximately what you ought to be aiming for at your age." Cordelia raised her eyes to the mirror. The hair that remained sat against her skull in uneven, hacked layers, the longest piece just brushing her jaw, the shortest above her ear, like the work of a careless soldier. Without the weight of it, her face looked unexpectedly clear, every line of cheekbone and brow and throat suddenly visible, like a portrait that had been hidden beneath 3 coats of varnish, and now stood unprotected to the room. She did not look like a governess. She looked like a woman who had been deliberately stripped, and who had not yet decided what to do about it. "You may go down," Marjorie said, "or you may keep to your chamber. I had thought to suggest the second. We can tell the Duke you are indisposed." "I am not indisposed." "You will be, by the time His Grace's carriage reaches the door." She crossed to the bell rope and pulled it twice. Somewhere in the house a small bell sounded. 2 pulls. Hot water for the morning room. Marjorie had been ringing the household bells in her own particular dialect for the 4 years since she had become Lord Ashbourne's widow and Cordelia's only family by law. "Whatever you have promised yourself you would do today," Marjorie added at the door, almost pleasantly, "I would advise against doing it. Your father's name carries less weight than you imagine. The Duke of Ravenholt is not coming here for you, Cordelia. He is coming because every door in 3 counties has been closed to him already, and ours, regrettably, is still open. Try to be useful and silent. Cyril will see him in the library." The door closed. Cordelia did not move for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, she reached forward and picked up one of the longest fallen lengths of hair from the carpet. She lifted it into the light. It was the color of strong tea with the sun behind it. Exactly the shade her father had always said reminded him of her mother. She wound it around her finger, 3 slow turns, and pressed her thumb against it, and felt the small, hot animal in her chest sit down obediently and wait. She was not going to cry. She was going to be in the library when the Duke of Ravenholt arrived, and he was not coming because every other door was shut to him. That was the part Marjorie had not understood, and that nobody in this house had understood for nearly 4 years now. He was coming because someone in this house, 3 winters ago, had sent him a letter that had probably saved his career, and he had been looking ever since for the woman who wrote it. He simply did not know yet that it had been her. The maid Sarah came in with the hot water before Cordelia had quite decided what to do with her face. Sarah was a square, sensible girl of 19, who had been at Ashbourne Park since she was 12, and who had loved Cordelia's father with the unsentimental devotion that good servants reserve for masters who treat them as though they had souls. She set the brass jug down on the washstand, looked at the floor, looked at Cordelia, and made a sound that was half a swallowed word and half a small sob she refused to release. "Oh, miss. Don't. Miss Cordelia, your hair." "I said don't, Sarah." Sarah crossed the room without permission and picked up the longest fallen length, the one Cordelia had not been able to retrieve, and folded it into a neat coil. Her hands were shaking. She tucked the coil into the pocket of her apron with the air of a woman concealing evidence. "His Grace has come over the rise," she said quietly, not looking up. "Mr. Bentham saw the outriders from the south paddock and came in. There are 4 of them, 2 carriages. He will be at the door in 20 minutes. 2 carriages? Yes, miss." Cordelia let out a slow breath. Marjorie had said the Duke was coming because every other door was shut to him. 2 carriages and 4 outriders did not look like a man whose doors had been shut. It looked like a man arriving on his own terms. "My green silk, Sarah," she said. "The one with the bronze trim." Sarah stopped. "Miss, your hair—" "I have an hour to do something about my hair." "Lady Marjorie said—" "Lady Marjorie is not the mistress of this house. She is the widow of its previous master. There is a difference." Cordelia stood. The strands on the floor moved slightly with her, like dry autumn leaves. "Bring me the green silk, and bring me the small pearl combs from my mother's box." "Miss, there is barely enough hair left for combs." "There is enough." Cordelia met Sarah's eyes in the mirror. "There is exactly enough." Sarah went, and for a moment Cordelia allowed herself the single luxury she had refused all morning. She pressed both palms flat against the dressing table, leaned forward, and breathed in once, deeply, the air that smelled of cut hair and cold wood smoke from the unlit grate, and the faint, ghostly trace of her father's pipe tobacco that had never quite left this room. Then she straightened. The dressing table mirror, beheld coldly, told her something Marjorie had not realized. With the hair gone, the eyes were larger. The mouth was nearer to the center of the face. The line of the throat, long, fine, descending in a single unbroken curve to the collarbone, was, for the first time in her life, fully visible. Marjorie had thought she was destroying her stepdaughter's appearance. What she had done, in fact, was uncover it. By the time Sarah returned with the gown and the pearl combs and a small bottle of rose water and a face that had decided to be useful instead of sentimental, Cordelia had washed the loose ends from her neck and tucked what was left of her hair behind her ears with 2 of the pearl combs. The effect was unexpected. Stark, certainly. Severe, perhaps. But the green silk had been her father's favorite of all her gowns, and against it, the cropped chestnut framed her face like the deliberate choice of a woman who had nothing to apologize for. She turned, lifted her chin, and walked out of the bedroom to meet a man who had been looking for her for 3 years, without knowing her name. Cyril Ashburn was waiting on the half landing, blocking the descent. He was Lord Ashburn's only son by Marjorie, a soft-featured young man of 23, with his mother's pale eyes and none of her competence, and a perpetual look of having just remembered an injury he meant to revenge. He was wearing his shooting coat, although he had never shot anything more dangerous than a hedgerow rabbit in his life, and he stood with one hand on the banister, as though he had been posted there. "You are not going down," he said. "I am going down." "Mother said—" "Cyril." She stopped 1 step above him, which made her almost his height. "Step aside." His Grace is here on a matter of business. Mother has explained that I will receive him. You will remain on this floor until called for. There is no business at Ashbourne Park that does not involve me. Cyril smiled. It was a small, careful smile, the kind he had been practicing since he was 16, for the moment he became master of the house. He had been waiting for it for 4 years, and the wait had not improved him. You are forgetting yourself, he said. And you are forgetting that this house, while my mother's, is mine by entail in 11 months, after which we will speak again, Cyril. Today is not 11 months from now. She stepped past him on the side away from the banister. He did not move to stop her physically. That would have required a kind of decision Cyril had never quite been able to make. But he turned to watch her descend with the expression of a man who had just realized his small, careful smile had not worked. He will not want you, he called after her, low, so it would not carry to the hall below. Mother has seen to that. Look at yourself. Cordelia did not pause. I have looked, she said, without turning. Cyril, you have no idea what he wants. Neither does your mother. The hall below was already in motion. Bentham, the butler, an old man who had served 3 generations of Ashbournes, and who was the second person in the house, after Sarah, who had wept the day Cordelia's father had been laid in the chapel vault, was standing by the front door, with the air of a man holding himself at attention. 2 footmen flanked him. Outside, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel had given way to the softer crunch of horses being brought to a halt. A coachman called. A door opened. Bentham caught Cordelia's eye as she crossed the hall. The look in his face was not surprise, although he must have seen her shorn head, and not pity, which she would not have forgiven. It was something closer to a salute. He gave her the smallest possible nod, an inch, perhaps less, and turned the great key in the front door. His Grace, the Duke of Ravenholt, he announced as the door swung wide. The man who stepped into the hall of Ashbourne Park was not what Cyril had expected, and not, in the end, quite what Cordelia had expected either, although she had 3 years of letters in her head to prepare her. He was 28, tall in the way that made doorways look ill-considered, with the sort of broad-shouldered build that comes from horses and sword exercise, and not from country idleness. His coat was a deep, fine bottle green, cut by someone who knew his shoulders. His hair was the color of dark wheat, slightly disordered by the ride. His face was made of clean planes, a nose that had been broken once and set well, a mouth that did not yet know it was meant to be amused, and a pair of grey eyes that were, in that first second, doing what grey eyes did very well, which was missing absolutely nothing. He saw her at once. He saw the cropped hair, the green silk, the pearl combs, the steadiness of her stance at the foot of the staircase. He saw all of it the way a man reads the title page of a book he has been hunting for in 3 counties. His expression did not change in any way the room could have used against him. But Cordelia, who had been counting since the shears, recognized the small, precise stillness that came over him, as the same stillness she had felt in herself when the first lock fell. He had seen her before. Not in person, but he had seen her. He bowed. Lady Cordelia, he said, before Bentham had finished introducing him, and before either Marjorie, descending the stair behind her with her best smile arranged, or Cyril, 6 steps higher, could intervene. Forgive me. I have ridden a long way and come into your hall with my dust still on me. I was told you would not be receiving. I am receiving, Cordelia said. So I see. There was a small silence. Marjorie reached the foot of the stair, swept past Cordelia with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent 4 years pretending to be the lady of a house that was not hers, and curtsied to the exact depth one offers a duke. Your Grace, welcome to Ashbourne Park. I am Lady Ashbourne. I see you have already met my late husband's daughter. I have, said the Duke. His eyes had not left Cordelia. My son will see you in the library, Marjorie continued. "We have prepared refreshment. Cordelia, my dear, you should sit by the fire in the morning room. The journey downstairs has clearly tired you." "I'm not tired," said Cordelia. "Your colour is high. You are tired." "My colour is high," said Cordelia, "because I am about to ask His Grace whether he would prefer his refreshment in the library or in the morning room, as he has come a long way, and as it is my house." For 1/2 second, Marjorie's smile did not move. The footmen, behind their wooden faces, did not breathe. Cyril, halfway down the staircase, made a small, strangled noise. "In the library, I think," said the Duke, with the perfect indifference of a man who had not heard the contradiction at all. "If Lady Cordelia would do me the honour of conducting me there." "Of course, Your Grace." She turned and walked, and behind her she heard the Duke fall into step at a measured pace, and behind him she heard Marjorie begin, in the lowest possible voice, the kind of instruction to Cyril that mothers reserved for sons who had just disappointed them in public. None of it carried. Cordelia did not look back. She had not expected to look up at the Duke as he entered. She had not expected him to look at her as if he already knew her name. She had certainly not expected, as they reached the library doors and he opened the right-hand one for her with the easy, automatic courtesy of a man who had been raised to open doors and not to think about it afterwards, that he would say, in a voice meant only for her, "You wrote the letter." She closed the library door behind them. It was the room she had loved most in the house, long, low-ceilinged, lined on 3 walls with bookcases her father had built up over 30 years, with 2 tall sash windows facing west across the park to a strip of beechwood that was now half gold and half bare. A fire had been laid, but not lit. The smell was of old leather and beeswax, and the faint, dry powder of paper. Her father's reading chair stood beside the fireplace. She had not allowed Marjorie to redo it. "Your Grace," she said, "sit down." He did not. He stood inside the door, holding his riding gloves in one hand, the other resting easily at his side. And he was looking at her with such open, steady attention that she had to remind herself she was not the one obliged to speak first. "You wrote the letter," he said again. "I wrote no letter to you." "You wrote the letter that went to my mentor, Lord Drayton, in March of 12. The one that corrected the manuscript he was about to publish. The Tacitus translation." She did not answer. "It was a 53-page corrigendum," he said. "Page references, Latin parallels, 3 citations from a 15th century commentary I had never heard of. It was signed only with a Greek letter. Lord Drayton did not publish. He was lost to us 8 months later, believing he had been saved from a public humiliation by an anonymous classicist in the country. I am very sorry to hear of Lord Drayton's loss. 3 years ago, after the Duke paused. After his affairs were closed, his papers came to me as his godson. The letter was among them. I have been looking ever since for the person who wrote it. I had assumed a man, a clergyman, possibly an Oxford fellow living quietly in retirement. I traced the handwriting through several routes that need not concern us." He paused again, and a small, dry, almost unwilling humour entered his voice for the first time. 3 weeks ago, I matched it to an account book from Ashbourne Park, lodged with the London Bank. The hand of the late Lord Ashbourne's daughter." "That account book was in my father's hand." "It was in the hand of someone who had been keeping it for him, while his own hand was no longer steady. There is no signature on either document, but the downstroke of the lowercase y is unmistakable. I had it compared by 3 experts. I came here to ask the woman who wrote that letter whether she would care to come to London and assist me, with the same translation I have now undertaken to finish on Lord Drayton's behalf." "You have ridden 2 days to offer me a clerical post." "I have ridden 2 days to offer you a partnership." The word landed in the quiet library, like a coin dropped on a hardwood floor. Cordelia did not move. The cropped ends of her hair brushed her jawline, as she turned her head a quarter-inch towards the window. Outside, a pair of rooks were circling above the beechwood. She watched them, because watching them gave her face somewhere to be that was not pointed at the Duke of Ravenholt. "You have not asked," she said, "why my stepmother cut my hair this morning." "I do not require you to explain your stepmother to me. I have known women like Lady Marjorie." "Then you understand that whatever you have come to offer me, she has set herself, in the next 2 hours, to refuse on my behalf." "She cannot refuse on your behalf. The post would be mine to offer, and yours to accept." "She will tell you that I am unwell, or unstable, or unmarriageable, or all three, depending on which she thinks will move you fastest out of the house." "I am not easily moved out of houses." She turned to face him then. The Duke had not crossed the room. He was still standing inside the door, gloves in one hand, the other still at his side. His expression was open in a way that she found, against her will, almost difficult to look at. Not because it was warm, although it was, but because it was unguarded. No man had looked at her this directly since her father. "Your Grace," she said, "I should like to ask you a question." "Ask it." "If I had been sitting in my room, with my hair as it was this morning, long, ungifted, untouched by my stepmother's shears, would your offer be exactly the same?" He looked at her. He did not answer at once. He was a man, she realized, who took questions seriously. "It would be exactly the same," he said, "except for one detail." "And that is?" "I would not yet have seen what you look like when someone tries to cut you down." She felt the small, hot animal in her chest sit up and pay attention. She turned her head deliberately back towards the window. "You may sit down, Your Grace." "Thank you." He sat in her father's chair, with the precise unconscious courtesy of a man who chose chairs by where they put his back. She did not sit. She walked the length of the long library table, pretending to consider a folio of botanical engravings that her father had bound himself. "Refreshment will be brought in," she said, over her shoulder. "My stepmother will arrange that the maid who brings it is one of hers. Anything you say in the next 30 minutes will reach her by sundown." "Then we should make the next 30 minutes worth her trouble." For the first time since the shears had closed, Cordelia smiled. It was not a wide smile. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement at one corner of the mouth. The kind her father had called the smile of a girl who has just understood a Latin pun. She turned, leaned her hip against the edge of the table, folded her arms across the green silk, and looked at the Duke of Ravenholt as if for the first time. "Very well, Your Grace," she said. "Tell me what you have actually come to offer." What he had come to offer, it turned out, was something more complicated than a clerical post, and more honest than a courtship. Lord Drayton's translation of the Annals, 3 full books, had been 3/4 finished at the time of his loss, and the publishing committee in London, which included 2 old men who had been kind to Drayton, and 1 young one who had not, had agreed to bring the work out under the editorial care of his godson, the Duke. The Duke had spent the better part of a year on it. He was a competent Latinist, he said, and an honest one, but he was not a great one, and he had reached, 3 weeks ago, a passage in the 2nd book that he could not in conscience finish without consulting the only living person who had publicly bested Drayton on a point of Tacitian syntax. "That person was you," he said. "That person was anonymous. That person, Lady Cordelia, signed the letter with a gamma. A gamma is not a signature. It was on Drayton's account in the British Library as recently as last spring. He used to refer to you as Gamma. He thought you were a man." His mouth twitched once. "He thought you were a man at All Souls, going under the name to spare a college dispute. He drank to your health every Christmas Eve for the last decade of his life. He had no idea he had been corrected by Lord Ashbourne's daughter at 23. 22. At 22, then." There was a small silence. Cordelia looked at the Duke's hands. They were a working man's hands more than a Duke's, broad, lightly calloused along the inside of the thumb, a faint scar across the back of the left one in the place where a man with a hunter's history of fences carried such things. "Why did you write that letter?" he asked. "Because Lord Drayton was about to publish a translation that mistook the Latin pluperfect for the imperfect, in a passage that completely altered the meaning of Tacitus's account of the Pisonian conspiracy. And because my father, who had corresponded with him for 20 years, was no longer well enough to write the correction himself." "You wrote in his place?" "I wrote in his hand, Your Grace. There is a difference. He read every page before it went. I did not invent his correction. I made it for him." "He must have been very proud of you." "He was gone 8 weeks later." She heard the word too late to soften it. It landed in the library as plainly as the word partnership had a quarter hour before. She did not apologize for it. "And my stepmother did not know about the letter. She still does not. It was the last thing my father and I built together, and it was the first thing I made certain she would never use against me." "She does not know now." "She does not know now." "Will she know?" he asked carefully. "In an hour, when refreshment is brought in, what you and I have just discussed." "What she will hear, Your Grace, is that you have asked me to come to London and work as your assistant translator, that I have agreed, and that you have agreed to settle £2,000 a year on me for the duration of the project." "2,000 a year?" "It is the standard fee for a senior editor at the Quarterly. I checked 3 years ago. I had thought I might be one someday, under another name." He laughed. It was the first laugh he had given the room, and it was a real one, not a polite one, and it broke across his face the way unexpected weather breaks across a hilltop, fast, complete, and over before it had quite finished. He did not apologize for it. He picked up his gloves from the arm of the chair, put them carefully down again, and said, "2,000 a year. Done." "You have not asked what conditions I attach." "I assume you have several." "I have 3. "I am listening."
First, you will engage me under my own name, not Gamma, not a male pseudonym. Cordelia Ashbourne. When the book is published, you will name me on the title page as your co-editor."
"Done."
Second, you will write a letter today, witnessed by Mr. Bentham, our butler, recording the engagement and the fee. The letter will be kept in this library, in a place known to Bentham and to me, and a copy will be sent by tonight's post to my father's solicitor at Lincoln's Inn."
"Done."
Third, she paused.
She was not sure she had the words for the third condition, until she heard herself say them.
Third, you will not on any account, in this house or in London, refer to my hair.
He did not laugh that time. He looked at her, very steady, for the length of a breath, and he said, "Lady Cordelia, I had not intended to refer to your hair in this house or in London before this conversation began. I do not intend to refer to it now."
"Thank you."
"On one condition of my own."
"What is that?"
"That when the annals are published and the title page is set, I am permitted to choose the dedication."
"To whom?"
"To Lord Ashbourne. With one phrase: in gratitude for the daughter he made." For 3 seconds, Cordelia did not breathe. Then she crossed the library, picked up the inkwell from her father's desk, and set it down within reach of the Duke's chair.
"Bentham," she said, walking to the door, "will bring you paper."
He stayed 3 days. Marjorie, who had spent the first afternoon laying traps, with the careful skill of a woman who had run a small estate's social warfare for 4 years, discovered by the evening of the second day that none of her traps had closed. The Duke would not be drawn into an interview alone with her in the morning room. He would not accept the bed she had had prepared for him in the south wing, too far from the library, he said pleasantly, where the work was. He would not let Cyril sit with him at dinner. He would not, when asked, comment on Cordelia's appearance, although he answered every other social question Marjorie put to him,
with the polite, patient detail of a man who had grown up in courts of inquiry. The household, which had spent 4 years organized around Marjorie's preferences, took roughly 36 hours to begin reorganizing itself around the Duke's. Bentham did so first, deliberately, with a small, private satisfaction that Cordelia caught once in the mirror over the sideboard and almost laughed at aloud. Sarah did so second, because Sarah loved Cordelia and would have served any man who treated her well. The 2 footmen followed. By the morning of the 3rd day, the kitchen had begun sending up the small dishes that Cordelia had favored as a girl. Dishes Marjorie had banned from the menus 4 years ago, on the grounds that they were common. Buttered eggs, soft cheese on toast, dried cherries soaked in cognac. Marjorie noticed. Of course, she noticed. She noticed, too, the way the Duke walked beside Cordelia each afternoon, at the same time of day, in the same long sweep down through the park to the river and back. His head bent very slightly to hear what Cordelia was saying, his hands clasped behind him in the easy, practiced attitude of a man who could have made any number of physical gestures, and was choosing, deliberately, not to. She noticed that Cordelia's pearl combs were polished every morning. She noticed that Cordelia had begun, in the evenings, to read aloud from the 2nd book of the Annals while the Duke wrote, both of them sitting at opposite ends of the long library table, with a single brace of candles between them. She noticed that the library door was always kept ajar an inch, and that Mr. Bentham passed it on the half-hour, as if by chance. She also noticed, on the morning of the 3rd day, that something had altered in her stepdaughter's bearing, that Cordelia, who had walked Ashbourne Park for 4 years as a guest in her own house, was beginning to walk it as a woman who knew exactly where she was. Marjorie did the only thing left to her. She wrote a letter. She wrote it in the small writing room beside her bedroom, in her own hand, on Ashbourne paper, with the seal of the late Lord Ashbourne pressed into the wax at the bottom. She addressed it to His Grace the Duke of Ravenholt at the house in Berkeley Square. She enclosed it in a second envelope, sealed and addressed to herself, and called Cyril. "I want you to take this to London on Friday morning," she said. "Have it delivered to His Grace's house. You will inform the porter that it was left in your charge by a person who did not wish to be named, and that you were paid 6pence to bring it as far as the door. You will hand it over and leave. You understand?" "Mother, Cyril, do you want this estate or not?" He took the letter. It would arrive in London 4 days after the Duke himself, which would give Marjorie's plot, she calculated, exactly enough time to ripen. She locked the writing room behind her. She went down to take her tea in the morning room, with the expression of a woman who had remembered, between courses, that she was the mistress of the house. On the morning of his departure, the Duke walked with Cordelia one last time to the foot of the beech avenue. The frost had thickened overnight. Their breath made small ghosts that travelled with them. A robin sang from the top of a yew, 3 notes and a fourth, the same phrase repeated, as though it were the only one he had been taught. "You will come to London on the 20th, he said. "I will send my mother's carriage. She is at Ravenholt House for the winter. She is—" he chose the word with care— "interested in meeting you." "Has she been told about me?" "She has been told that I am bringing a co-editor to Ravenholt House for the publication of Drayton's Annals. She has been told that this co-editor is a lady. She knows nothing else. Whatever the rest of London begins to say, she will know before they do, and she will, if you do not object, be your shield until you choose otherwise." "And what will the rest of London begin to say?" The Duke considered the avenue ahead of them. The beeches stood in 2 long rows, half their leaves already on the ground, the morning light falling in lozenges across the gravel. "They will say," he said, "that the Duke of Ravenholt has brought a young woman of unusual learning to live under his mother's roof. They will say that her hair is short. They will speculate as to why. They will agree, in time, that the explanation must be either scandal or religious mania. They will, the more careful among them, ask who her people were. They will find out about your father. They will be, in private, more impressed than they will say." "And in public?" "In public, Lady Cordelia,
They will be afraid of you. They will be afraid because you will know things at dinner tables that no woman of your age in London is supposed to know, and because you will know them more accurately than the men in the room, and because, when challenged, you will be unable to pretend you do not. They will be afraid of you, and from fear, they will reach, sooner or later, for the easiest weapon any drawing room ever offered against a woman. Which is the suggestion that she is the Duke's mistress. He said it plainly, without softening, because she had asked plainly. She nodded, also without softening, and looked at the robin in the yew until she had finished thinking. And what will be done about that suggestion? It will be answered, said the Duke, by me, and by my mother, and by Lord Drayton's surviving brother, and by the title page of the Annals. It will be answered, if the matter goes further than answers, by a marriage settlement. But that, Lady Cordelia, is your decision to make in your own time, and I have not come here to extract it from you by means of an honor you did not choose. That is a great deal of architecture, Your Grace, to support a translation of Tacitus. It is a great deal of architecture, Lady Cordelia, because what we are about to do is not, in fact, the translation of Tacitus. Is it not? No. The translation is the public name of the thing. The actual thing is the entry of one woman of unusual learning into the upper edge of public life under the cover of a publishing project. We are going to publish Drayton's Annals. We are also going to publish you. The first will take 10 months. The second will take the rest of your life. She was silent for a long moment. I had not thought of it in those terms. You did not need to think of it in those terms when you sat in this house writing in the dark. You will need to in London. Your Grace, Marcus. His Christian name had come out before she had quite intended it to, and his expression did not move except for one small involuntary tightening at the corner of the eye that she did not yet know how to read. I should like to think for the rest of today, and answer you when you ride out. I would not have you do otherwise. They walked back to the house in silence. The robin in the yew gave up his 4 notes and tried another phrase. The frost on the gravel cracked faintly under their boots. At the door, the Duke bowed, and Cordelia curtsied, and Marjorie, who had been watching from the morning-room window for the last quarter of an hour, lowered the curtain at exactly the moment they could not see her. Cordelia did not go in. She turned aside at the porch and walked, alone, down the side of the house to the small walled garden, where her father had kept his medicinal herbs, and where, in the 3rd winter of his illness, he had taken to sitting in a brick alcove out of the wind to watch his daughter pick the last of the rosemary for the kitchen. The bench was still there. The rosemary was still there. Nothing in this house, Cordelia had often thought, had moved an inch since her father had set it down. She sat on the bench. The cold of the brick came through the green silk. She did not move. She wanted, for 1/4 hour, to be cold, because she wanted to think clearly, and clarity for her had always been a slightly cold thing. She had been offered a life, not, in the end, the life she had once imagined for herself. Quiet rooms, modest competence, a steady correspondence with Oxford men under another name. The life she had been offered this morning was a different one entirely. It was a life of unfamiliar visibility. It was a life in which her own name would appear on a title page in 3 counties' bookshops. It was a life in which a duke's mother would be her shield, which meant that for some period, perhaps months, perhaps years, she would owe a debt to a woman she had not yet met. It was, possibly, a life in which she would marry, although the Duke had refused to make that a condition. It was, certainly, a life that contained the Duke himself, every morning across a library table, his head bent in concentration, his hands occasionally turning a page with the careful gentleness she had already begun to catalogue. She did not know whether she loved him. She knew that she had laughed in the library 3 times in the last 3 days. She had not laughed 3 times in the 4 years before that, taken together. That was not love, but it was something close enough to be alarming. She also knew,
with the cold, flat clarity she had inherited from her father, that whatever she felt or did not feel, the Duke had told her the truth on the avenue. The thing was not Tacitus. The thing was her, brought into a kind of public daylight she had never asked for, with a man at her side who had ridden 2 days to find her and offered her a partnership before he offered her anything else. A pair of small footsteps crunched on the gravel. "Miss?" Sarah, breathing fast, the coil of saved hair still apparently in her pocket, because Sarah had become, in the last 72 hours, the most loyal conspirator any woman ever had. "Mr. Bentham asks if you would come into the library. His Grace is gone, but Mr. Bentham has a letter for you from a London solicitor." "From Lincoln's Inn?" "He thinks so, miss." Cordelia stood. The cold from the bench had done its work. She felt, walking back into the house, exactly as she had felt at 6 in the morning, when her stepmother had picked up the shears and asked her to hold still. Clear in the head, calm in the hand, and unwilling to be moved from a path she had not chosen, but was not, now, going to refuse. The letter on the library table was, as Bentham had thought, from her father's solicitor. It was a copy of the engagement letter the Duke had written 3 days ago in this room, and which had gone by night post to Lincoln's Inn at her insistence. It was witnessed in Bentham's careful copperplate. It bore the Duke's signature at the bottom, Marcus Henry Alaric Stanton, Ravenholt, and beside it, in a smaller hand, the solicitor had penciled the words, "Filed in the Ashbourne Deeds Box, 14th instant. Acknowledged. H. Carruthers." She folded the letter into the inside pocket of her stepmother's least favourite cloak, and walked back upstairs to write the Duke's answer. 3 days later, on a wet Friday morning in November, the second carriage from the South Paddock at Ashbourne Park set out for London with Cordelia inside it. She wore the green silk under a thick travelling cape. The pearl combs were in her travelling case. Sarah sat across from her, plump and silent and proud, with the saved coil of chestnut hair still in her apron pocket, because Sarah was not a woman who let evidence be thrown away. In Marjorie's writing room that same morning, Cyril stood awkwardly with his mother's letter inside his coat, listening to her instructions for the 3rd time. "The porter is to be paid 6pence. 6pence, yes. You will not say my name. You will not say your name." "I will not say my name." "You will leave the letter, and you will leave the house." "I will leave the house." "Cyril." She gripped his wrist. "If you bring me back this letter undelivered, I will see that you do not see the house again." "Mother, I will deliver the letter." She let go. She watched, from the window of the writing room, the second carriage pull away from the porch with her stepdaughter inside it. The robin in the yew was silent that morning. The frost was almost gone. The world had warmed 1/2 degree, in the perverse way the English weather sometimes does on the day a woman loses something for which she has been planning for 4 years. By Tuesday morning, Marjorie had calculated, the letter would have reached the Duke. By Wednesday, the rumours she had carefully seeded with 2 cousins in town would have reached the Duke's mother. By Friday, at the latest, the Duke would have understood that the woman he had brought to London was not the woman she had pretended to be. And the woman he had brought to London, Cordelia, the unexpected, the dangerous, the suddenly visible Cordelia, would be on the road back to Ashbourne Park. Marjorie turned away from the window. She rang the bell 3 times. Tea for 1 in the morning room. She had 11 months, she thought, to win the entail back for her son. She had perhaps fewer than 3 weeks before the Duke of Ravenholt would arrive at her door a second time. Cordelia reached Berkeley Square at sunset on the second day of travel. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt was waiting in the hall. She was not, as Cordelia had half expected, an imposing woman. She was small, perhaps an inch shorter than Cordelia, with white hair drawn back into a knot that revealed an unfashionably high forehead, and grey eyes very like her son's. She wore a plain grey silk with 1 row of jet beads. She did not curtsy, because she did not curtsy to anyone, But she stepped forward, took both of Cordelia's hands in her own. They were small, dry, faintly warm, and looked her steadily in the face. "You are Lord Ashbourne's daughter," she said. "I am. My son tells me you corrected Drayton on a point of Latin syntax at 22 and wrote a 53-page corrigendum in your father's hand." "I did." "I should like to know," said the Duchess of Ravenholt evenly, "whether you also play the pianoforte, because if you do, I should like you to spend half an hour after supper playing for me, in order to find out whether I am going to like you, because I find I make up my mind faster about people who play." "I play badly, Your Grace." "Then we shall enjoy it together." Cordelia laughed for the 4th time in 8 days. The Duke, who had been standing in the doorway of the small drawing room and had clearly been watching his mother and her co-editor very narrowly during this exchange, said nothing. But he smiled, once. A small, quick smile that was gone before Cordelia could quite meet his eye, and turned away to attend to a footman. Berkeley Square had welcomed her. It would, she thought, take her some time to understand exactly what it was she had been welcomed into. The first 10 days of the work fell into a shape neither of them had quite expected. They began at 9 in the morning in the Duke's library, which faced east and was filled, by 9:30, with the kind of pale, clear London light that made paper look very white and ink very dark. The Duke worked at the long table near the window. Cordelia worked at a smaller desk set at right angles to his, perhaps 2 yards away, with her father's annotated Tacitus and the Duke's manuscript pages set out in front of her. She read aloud. He wrote. He read aloud. She wrote. Between them, on the table, sat a brace of candles that were never lit, because the daylight in this room was so generous that no one needed them. They worked, the first morning, for 3 hours without a single private word. They worked, the second morning, for 3 hours, and exchanged exactly 4 sentences, all of them about the Latin pluperfect. By the 5th morning, Cordelia could read his handwriting without effort, and he could anticipate her objections 2 pages in advance, and they had begun to laugh, occasionally, at the small absurdities that the late Lord Drayton had left behind for them. A marginal note in violet pencil that read, "Dull but true." A Latin pun he had attempted in a footnote. A date he had recorded incorrectly because he had a personal feud with his housekeeper that year and could not concentrate. It was the Dowager Duchess who insisted, on the 7th evening, that they were not to dine alone together. "My dear," she said to her son, over Cordelia's head, in the manner of a woman who had decided long ago to deliver her important communications in front of any witness within reach. "You are going to ruin the girl by accident if you go on as you are. You will dine with me and with Lady Cordelia every evening this week, and we will have one guest at table at least 3 nights in 5. Beginning with Lord Sefton on Thursday. He is harmless. He will see her, and he will tell 3 drawing rooms about her by Friday, and that is precisely what I require." "Mother, the work is going excellently. The work has nothing to do with what we are discussing. I am proposing to construct a small social fortification around the lady, before anyone else has time to dig a trench." "You are using military metaphors at dinner again." "I am using military metaphors at dinner because we are at war, my dear, and you have not yet noticed." The Duke set down his fork. "Mother," he said quietly, "I have noticed." It was the first time, in Cordelia's company, that he had referred even indirectly to the fact that they were at war. She did not raise her eyes from her plate. She did, however, set her own spoon very carefully across the rim of the porcelain, a small, deliberate gesture that the Dowager Duchess did not miss, although she pretended not to see it. "Then we are agreed," said the Duchess. "Lord Sefton on Thursday." "Lord Sefton on Thursday." "Lady Cordelia." "Your Grace." "You will wear the dark gold." "I do not own a dark gold gown." "You will have one by Thursday. Don't fuss. I have an excellent woman in Conduit Street." Cordelia did not protest. She had spent 10 days now in the orbit of the Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt, and she had learned, very quickly, that arguing with her was like arguing with weather. One simply turned one's collar up and waited. But she did, that night, on the way to her bedroom, put her hand on the Duke's sleeve as they passed in the upper hall. He stopped at once. "You should not let your mother dress me," she said quietly. "My mother is going to dress every woman who comes into this house from now until she is no longer with us. If you are concerned about it, I will speak to her." "It is not the dress. It is—" She paused, and the cropped chestnut hair brushed the collar of her traveling cape, and she found, to her own surprise, that her voice was almost steady. "It is that I do not yet know what shape I am in this house. I came as your co-editor. Your mother is treating me as a daughter-in-law in waiting, and neither of us has discussed it with each other, or with me." "You are right," he said. "I have been—" He closed his eyes for half a second, and opened them again, with the same clean, steady attention he had brought into her library 3 weeks before. "I have been treating the question of the shape of you in this house with the cowardice of a man who is happy in the meantime, and does not wish to disturb a happiness he is not yet sure he has earned." "Marcus." "Cordelia. I am not asking you to declare an intention tonight. I am asking you to be the man you were on the avenue at Ashbourne. The one who told me precisely what we were doing." He nodded once. "On Friday," he said. "After Sefton. I will tell you, after Sefton, exactly what I am proposing, work and otherwise. And you will tell me, after Sefton, exactly what you require of me. We will not pretend, after Sefton, but we are anything other than what we are. Will you accept those terms?" "I will accept those terms." "Thank you." He bowed very slightly. He did not touch her. The space between his hand and hers on the railing of the upper hall was perhaps 3 inches. And for those 3 inches Cordelia would have given, in that moment, almost anything. But neither of them moved. The Dowager Duchess's voice from the dining room below, calling for Bentham's London counterpart, a butler named Pierce, on some matter of the Thursday menu, broke the moment cleanly, and Cordelia went on up to her bedroom, and Marcus went back down to his mother, and the upper hall closed its 3-inch silence behind them. It was on Wednesday morning, at the start of the 11th day, that Cyril's letter arrived. Pierce brought it on the silver tray with the rest of the Morning Post into the breakfast room. The Duke was sitting at the head of the table with his coffee and the manuscript page he had been working on the night before. His mother was at the foot, eating a small dish of preserved figs with the precision of a woman who had eaten preserved figs every morning of her adult life. Cordelia was opposite the windows, reading a printed copy of the Tacitus she had brought from her father's library. Marcus broke the seal of the top letter, glanced at it, set it down and reached for the next. He picked it up. He stopped. Cordelia, across the table, saw him stop. She did not look up at once. She turned a page of the Tacitus and waited. The Duke broke the second seal. He read. He read again. He set the letter down on the tablecloth and looked across at his mother. "Mother, my dear, I have here a letter," he said carefully, "purporting to be from Lady Cordelia Ashbourne, requesting that I cease all contact with her on the grounds that her engagement to me, which she alleges I am attempting to enforce against her wishes, is repugnant to her religious conscience. She signs herself Cordelia Margaret Ashbourne. Ah. It is not her hand. It is a competent forgery. The downstroke of the Y is wrong." He looked at Cordelia. She did not look up from the Tacitus. She turned another page. "I would not," she said, in the very even voice she had begun to develop at the age of 10, "have signed any letter to you, Cordelia Margaret. I would have signed Cordelia Anne, which is my correct second name. And I do not have a religious conscience that would object to publishing a translation of Tacitus, even one as middling as Drayton's. May I see the letter?" Marcus passed it down the table. Cordelia read it twice. The second time she actually laughed. A small, short, surprised laugh, that escaped before she had quite decided to let it out. "It is Marjorie's hand," she said. "She has copied my Y from a household account she kept in my hand 4 years ago. She has missed the downstroke. It is otherwise excellent. I think we may take it that my stepmother has decided to attack."
"This is not an attack on you," said the Dowager Duchess, setting her spoon down. "This is an attempt to remove you from my house."
"It is both, Your Grace."
"It is both. You are quite right." The Duke had not moved. He was looking at the letter on the tablecloth, as though it were an unwelcome but instructive species of insect. "How," he said, "did your stepmother contrive to have a letter brought to my London porter by a person who could not be named and would not give his face?"
"Cyril."
"Cyril."
"My stepbrother. He will have brought it himself. He will have been paid 6pence by his mother to do exactly the trick. Marjorie is not a creative woman. She is a methodical one."
"Then we know who delivered it."
"We know who delivered it."
"And we can prove it."
"If we can find Cyril in London this week, we can prove it. He is not a clever liar. Mr. Bentham, our butler at Ashbourne Park, will swear in court that Cyril took the letter from my stepmother's hand on Wednesday morning. He will swear because he loved my father. He may also swear because he loathes Cyril. Either will do."
The Dowager Duchess refilled her coffee.
"Marcus," she said, "today is Wednesday. Tomorrow is Thursday. Thursday evening we receive Lord Sefton. I propose that we receive Lord Sefton in our most ordinary state of cheerfulness, which is to say that we will not mention this letter to him or to anyone else, and that on Friday morning you will go to Bow Street. You will lay an information against Lady Marjorie Ashbourne for the forgery of her stepdaughter's hand in a private correspondence, and you will produce Mr. Bentham in London by next Monday as your principal witness. Mother, I am not finished. You will produce Cyril Ashbourne by next Tuesday as your second witness. You will not produce him in court. You will produce him in this house. You will give him the option of swearing privately that he carried his mother's letter, knowing it to be a forgery, in exchange for your silence at Bow Street, or of being publicly named at the magistrate's bench as a small-time confederate to a forgery against a duke.
He will choose the first. He is, by your account, Lady Cordelia, a young man whose primary fault is cowardice. We will use the fault." Cordelia looked at the Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt across the breakfast plates.
"Your Grace," she said.
"My dear."
"You are formidable."
"I have been formidable for 61 years, my dear. It would be a great pity to stop now." Lord Sefton came to dinner on Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. He was a stout, kind, slightly deaf man in his middle 50s, who had known the Duke's father at Cambridge, who had read every book of Tacitus 3 times because he believed that men who governed without history would govern badly, and who had been told by the Dowager Duchess that he was to come to dinner because there was a young woman of unusual learning who deserved to be seen by an unprejudiced witness of his rank. The dark gold gown had been delivered to Cordelia's room at 4 that afternoon. It fitted as though the woman in Conduit Street had had a portrait of her since infancy. It set the cropped chestnut hair against a colour that should have been impossible against her skin, and instead made it look like a deliberate artistic decision. The hair of a woman who had decided to wear it short, the way some women decide to wear feathers in their bonnets. The Dowager Duchess, inspecting her in the small drawing room at 6:30, said only, "Yes, better than I had hoped. You will sit on my son's right." "He should sit on your right, Your Grace." "He should sit, my dear, where he has been sitting for 30 years. You will sit on his right. We have one guest at dinner. He is the most important guest you will receive in your life, although he will not know it. Be exactly as you are. He has heard about your father. He will want to talk Tacitus to you. Let him. Be neither modest nor flashy. Be Lady Cordelia Ashbourne, who corrected Drayton at 22, and is going to be on the title page of the Annals by Easter. That is enough." "Yes, Your Grace." "And Cordelia." "Your Grace."
If at any point you become uncertain whether you are conducting yourself well, look at my son. If he is smiling, you are. If he is not, I will rescue you. You will not have to ask. Lord Sefton arrived, was shown in, embraced the Duke, kissed the Dowager Duchess's hand, was introduced to Cordelia, looked at her once with a polite social glance, looked at her a second time with an entirely different and unself-conscious attention, and said, "I beg your pardon, Lady Cordelia. I have been told that you understand the annals of Tacitus better than any living scholar of my acquaintance. I should warn you that I will probably bore you, before the evening is finished, with a question I have carried for 40 years, and have never been able to ask anyone." "You may ask it now, my lord." "At dinner?" "At dinner. I do not believe Tacitus is much improved by being kept until the soup." The Dowager Duchess laughed silently into her napkin. The Duke, beside Cordelia, did not laugh, but he did, very slightly, and without anyone other than Cordelia noticing, lay his hand on the back of her chair, where his arm rested. He did not touch her shoulder. He did not need to. They went in to dinner. For 10 minutes, Cordelia answered Lord Sefton's question, which was a perfectly intelligent question, about the way Tacitus's use of the historic infinitive shifted between Annals 2 and Annals 3, and which the Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt had been quietly hoping he would ask all week, because Lord Sefton was a man who could not keep an intellectual delight to himself for 48 hours, and who would, by Saturday, have told 9 of the most useful drawing-rooms in London that Lord Ashburn's daughter was the cleverest young woman he had met since his late wife had been 20. By the time the partridge had come and gone, Lord Sefton had decided, without explicitly deciding anything, that this young woman with the cropped hair and the calm grey eyes and the small, exact laugh was going to be invited, when the time came, to every house in town where his recommendation carried weight, and that the rumour about her hair was going to die on her own terms, and not on London's. He left at 11, kissed the Dowager Duchess's hand again, asked permission to call again before the end of the month, and bowed to Cordelia with a depth that even the Duke noticed. The hall door closed behind him. The Dowager Duchess turned to her son. "It is done." "It is done." She turned to Cordelia, lifted one small, dry hand, and laid it on Cordelia's cheek. "My dear," she said, "you have earned your dinner." She went up to bed. Cordelia and the Duke stood in the hall. "Friday," he said after a long moment. "Friday is tomorrow." "Friday is tomorrow. I told you, in this house, on Monday night, that on Friday I would tell you exactly what I was proposing, and that you would tell me exactly what you required. I have not changed." "Neither have I." "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow." He did not bow. He did not kiss her hand. He stood opposite her for the space of one breath, looked at her in the way he had once looked at her at the foot of the stair at Ashbourne Park, and said, very quietly, "You looked tonight, Lady Cordelia, exactly as I have known for 3 weeks that you would look. I was glad. That is all I will say tonight." He went up to his rooms. Cordelia went up to hers. In the dark, before she fell asleep, she ran her hand along the cropped ends of her hair where they brushed her jaw, and she thought, for the first time since the shears had closed, that she could perhaps grow it back, in time, on her own choosing, and that it might come back darker, and that there would be a man in this house who would prefer it whatever shape it took. Cyril Ashbourne was, in fact, in London. He was lodging, against his mother's instructions, at a small public house in Holborn that had been recommended to him by a school acquaintance of dubious character. He had spent the better part of 3 days drinking small ale in the parlour and trying to look like a young man of consequence, and on the morning of his 4th day, he was discovered, without difficulty, by a Bow Street officer whom the Dowager Duchess's solicitor had quietly hired the previous afternoon. He was brought, not to Bow Street, but to Berkeley Square in a closed carriage, and ushered into the small drawing-room where the Duke and the Dowager Duchess and Cordelia were sitting at 3 in the afternoon. He looked, on entering, very young and very pale and very afraid. "Cousin Cordelia," he said. "Cyril? I have come to—" "You have not come, Cyril. You have been brought." Yes." The Duke had risen. The Dowager Duchess had not. Cordelia, who knew Cyril best, had not risen either, because she had known the moment Cyril walked through the door that the situation did not require her to stand. "Mr. Ashbourne," said the Duke quietly. "Sit down." "Your Grace." "Sit down." Cyril sat. He sat on the very edge of the chair Pierce indicated to him. His hands, which had been chosen by Marjorie for their resemblance to gentility, were trembling. "I am going to ask you," said the Duke, "one question, and the answer you give to that question will determine the rest of your life. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Did you, on Wednesday last, deliver to the porter at this house a letter which had been written and sealed by your mother, Lady Marjorie Ashbourne, in which she forged your sister, Lady Cordelia Ashbourne's signature?" A long silence. Cyril looked at his shoes. Cordelia, watching him, knew exactly what Cyril was doing. He was running, in his small, worried mind, through the calculation Marjorie had given him 3 weeks ago. He was estimating the cost of saying yes. He was estimating the cost of saying no. He was discovering, in the slow, steady gaze of the Duke of Ravenholt, that neither of his mother's calculations had included the possibility that he might be made to give the answer in a London drawing room, rather than in the privacy of his own family. "I did," he said. "You delivered the letter." "I delivered the letter." "You knew when you delivered it that the signature was your mother's forgery of your sister's hand." Yes, I knew." "Are you prepared," said the Duke, "to repeat that statement, today, in writing, witnessed by my mother and by Lady Cordelia, and by Mr. Pierce, my butler?" "Your Grace." Cyril's voice broke. He looked at Cordelia, and then at the Dowager Duchess, and then back at his shoes. "If I do, my mother will—" "Your mother, Mr. Ashburn, has already done. The question is, what you are going to do." "What do you require, Your Grace?" "I require," said the Duke, "the statement in writing. I require also a second statement, in which you swear that you will not, for the rest of your natural life, accept any instruction from your mother in any matter concerning your stepsister, Lady Cordelia Ashbourne, or any matter concerning the estate of Ashbourne Park, as it relates to her. In exchange, this household will not lay an information against you at Bow Street. The forgery charge will rest entirely against your mother, where it belongs. You will return to Ashbourne Park. You will inform Mr. Bentham that I am sending him a letter under separate cover, and you will not interfere in your stepsister's affairs again. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Cordelia." "Marcus?" "Is that sufficient for you?" She looked at Cyril a long moment. She had known him since he was a small, watchful, deeply ordinary boy of 14. She did not hate him. She had never hated him. She had only ever found him, like his mother, methodical, without imagination, and incapable of seeing that there were other lives in the house besides his own. He was sitting in front of her now, 23 years old, white in the face, and she understood for the first time that he was probably going to be 23 years old at the back of his eyes for the rest of his life. "It is sufficient," she said. "Cyril, listen to me carefully. You may go home. You may keep the entail when it falls. I will not contest it. But you will write to me, by the end of next week, with a list of the household servants your mother has dismissed in the last 4 years, with the dates of their dismissal. Sarah will know most of them. Bentham will know the rest. I am going to find them, and where they have been wrongly turned out, I am going to restore them. You will not stop me. Do you understand?" "Yes." "And Cyril?" "Yes." "Do not write a letter to your mother before you reach the carriage. She will know, soon enough, what has happened. She will not need you to inform her. Yes. He signed both statements. Pierce countersigned. The Dowager Duchess countersigned. Cordelia countersigned. The Duke folded the papers, locked them in the small mahogany cabinet by the window, and turned the key.
Cyril was taken out, by the same officer who had brought him, and put on the night coach to Hungerford, with a small purse for his expenses that the Duke had handed him, with the politely murderous air of a man who hoped he would never see the recipient again. The Duke turned the key in the lock once more, for the satisfaction of it. "Mother," he said. "Cordelia, will you both come into the library?" They went. The library at Berkeley Square was smaller than the one at Ashbourne Park, but warmer. A fire had been laid and lit by Pierce at 2:30 in anticipation. The Duke closed the door behind them, did not sit, paced once to the fire, paced back, and stopped at the table. "Mother," he said, "you have run a household for 38 years. I have, today, watched you dispose of a forgery and protect Lady Cordelia and discipline a coward without once raising your voice. I should like to ask you something." "Ask, my dear." "How long," said the Duke, "have you known that I was going to propose to Lady Cordelia Ashbourne?" The Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt looked at her son. She looked at Cordelia. She set down the bag in which she had been carrying a small embroidery she had brought into the drawing room and not touched. "Marcus," she said, "I have known you were going to propose to Lady Cordelia since the morning you opened Lord Drayton's papers 3 years ago, came down to breakfast and told me you had found in his correspondence the work of the cleverest unknown scholar in England, and that you were going to find her. I knew it was a woman before you did. I did not say so. Mothers who tell their sons everything raise sons who do not listen. Mother, you are going to propose to her now, Marcus, in this room, in front of me. I am not going to leave. You will not do better in your lifetime than you will do this afternoon. Do not waste the afternoon." The Duke laughed. A single, startled, almost incredulous laugh. "Mother," he said, "I love you." "Of course you do. Lady Cordelia." "Your Grace." "Please indulge, my son." Cordelia, standing on the other side of the library table, met Marcus's eye. It was not an easy gaze to hold. He had walked, in the last 3 weeks, the road from a stranger at her door to a man who had ridden 2 days to find her, to a man whose mother was sitting 6 feet away with her hands folded patiently in her lap, as if she had been waiting since the morning of Lord Drayton's papers 3 years ago for exactly this scene. He looked, in that moment, exactly as he had looked at the foot of her staircase at Ashbourne Park. Clear-eyed, broad-shouldered, perfectly unembarrassed by the open attention of every person in the room. "Cordelia," he said. "Marcus, on the avenue at Ashbourne, 3 weeks ago, I told you that what we were doing was the publication of one woman of unusual learning into public life, and that the first half of the work was Drayton's Annals, and the second half was the rest of your life. I should like to amend that statement." "How?" "I should like the rest of your life, if you will have it, to be conducted in this house, under this name, with me, as my wife. I do not propose it because the world is going to call you my mistress if I do not. I do not propose it because my mother wishes it, although she does. I do not propose it because I cannot continue the translation without you, although I cannot. I propose it because in 3 weeks I have learned that I do not, in fact, wish to read Tacitus across a table from anyone else for the rest of my natural life, and because I have realized, in those 3 weeks, that what I had assumed was the desire to find the writer of one letter was, in fact, the desire to find you, Cordelia Ann Ashbourne. With your hair as it is now, and with your hair as it will be, and with whatever your hair will be in 20 years. With everything you have written, and everything you have not yet written. With everything you have suffered, and everything you have not yet suffered. With me, in this house, from today. She did not answer at once. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt, on her chair beside the fire, did not move.
The fire spoke quietly to itself. The clock on the mantel struck the half-hour. "Marcus," said Cordelia.
"Yes. I told you, in this house on Monday night, that I would tell you on Friday exactly what I required. I have not changed." "What do you require?" "That you put my name on the title page of the annals. That you do not refer to my hair. That you treat me, every day of our marriage, as you treated me on the avenue at Ashbourne. As an equal in the work, and an equal at the table. That you stand between me and London when I require it, and step aside from me when I do not. That you bring my old servants back into our houses when I find them. That you do not, on any account, allow your mother to dress me without consulting me first." "Mother?" "That last one, my dear, is between you and Lady Cordelia." "That last one," said the Duke, "is mine to negotiate, Cordelia. The first 6 are agreed." "Then I will marry you." For 3 seconds, the library was silent. The Duke crossed the floor in 2 strides. He stopped a careful arm's length from her, because his mother was sitting 6 feet away. He raised her right hand, the one that had held the green silk steady at the foot of the stair 3 weeks ago, the one that had folded into the pocket of her travelling cape the letter from her father's solicitor, and he held it against his cheek for the length of a heartbeat, no more. Then he kissed it, once, in the centre of the palm, and laid it back down. "Cordelia," he said. "Thank you." "Marcus!" The Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt rose from her chair. "My dears," she said, "I shall now leave the library. I shall now ring for tea in the drawing-room. I shall now write 3 letters. 1 to Bow Street's Chief Magistrate, enclosing certain depositions. 1 to Lord Sefton, enclosing a note to the effect that Lady Cordelia Ashbourne will be marrying my son in the new year, and 1 to my dressmaker in Conduit Street, to inform her that she will be required to make a wedding gown. I should be grateful if you would not require me to interrupt any of these letters until I have finished them. You may come down at your leisure." She walked to the door. She turned. "Marcus." "Mother?" 40 seconds. Then come down." She closed the door behind her. For the first time in 3 weeks, the Duke of Ravenholt and Cordelia Ashbourne were alone in a room with the door shut. The 40 seconds were not, in the end, used for anything Marjorie Ashbourne would have recognized as compromising. He cupped her face in both hands. She rested her forehead against his collarbone. They stood, very still, for 30 of the 40 seconds in the only silence Cordelia had had since the shears had closed 3 weeks before. Then he tipped her face up gently and kissed her. Once, on the mouth, slowly, the way a man kisses a woman whose answer he has only just been given, and whose answer he does not intend to forget. 40 seconds, he murmured. 40 seconds. They went down. Lady Marjorie Ashbourne was arrested in the morning room at Ashbourne Park on the 2nd Tuesday of December at 10:15 in the morning by an officer from the county sheriff's office on a warrant signed in London the previous Friday. She did not, when the officer entered, behave well. She demanded to know on what authority. She demanded that Bentham be summoned. She demanded to see Cyril, who was upstairs in his bedroom and who, on hearing the officer's voice in the hall, had quietly closed his bedroom door and made no move to come down. She demanded, finally, that the letter from the Duke of Ravenholt's solicitor be produced. It was produced. She read it twice, and then went very still. She was permitted to pack a single travelling case. She was permitted to write 1 letter, which she addressed to her solicitor in town, and which was given to Bentham to send. She was not permitted to remain in the house. Mr. Bentham, when she asked him for the courtesy of a private word in the hall, did not refuse her, but he listened to what she said, with the air of a man who had been waiting 4 years to listen, and who had no intention of replying. She left in the closed carriage the officer had brought. The forgery charge would, in the event, be quietly settled out of court, an arrangement made by the Duke's solicitor on Cordelia's instruction,
because Cordelia did not wish her late father's name attached to a criminal prosecution in the public papers. Lady Marjorie Ashbourne would, instead, retire to a small house belonging to a distant cousin in Devon, on a small private allowance from the Ravenholt estate, with the firm written understanding that she would not return to Ashbourne Park, would not correspond with her son on matters of business, and would not enter London during the season for the rest of her life. She would, by all reports, comply. She was a methodical woman, after all, and she had finally lost a calculation she could not redo. The morning Marjorie left, Bentham locked the door of the writing room behind her, climbed the stairs to Cordelia's old bedroom on the south side of the house, and stood, for a long moment, looking at the dressing-table mirror where, in October, his master's daughter had counted the cuts of a pair of shears. He picked up the pair of shears, which had been left exactly where Lady Marjorie had set them down, walked them out to the kitchen yard, and placed them in the kitchen rubbish bucket with the air of a man retiring an instrument of war. He returned to the front hall. Sarah was there, with a duster, on the pretext of work. "Mr. Bentham." "Sarah." "Will Miss Cordelia be coming back, do you think?" "She will be coming back, Sarah. For the first time. As mistress." "And His Grace?" "And His Grace." Sarah dusted, for some minutes, things that did not require dusting. Bentham, who had served 3 generations of Ashbournes, and who had a quiet, private opinion about a young woman who had once corrected an Oxford translator at 22, set himself in the library and began to make a careful list, in his copperplate, of every servant Marjorie Ashbourne had dismissed in the last 4 years. By Christmas Day it would be a list of 11 names. By Easter, 7 of them would be back at Ashbourne Park, in better positions than they had left, by the new Duchess's direct correspondence. The Duke of Ravenholt and Cordelia Ashbourne were married in the chapel at Ashbourne Park on the 2nd Saturday in January, in a small private ceremony, attended by the Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt, Lord Sefton, Mr. Bentham, Sarah, the cousin who had married Cordelia's mother's sister, and 7 of the Ashbourne tenants who had asked to come. Cordelia wore a gown of deep gold silk. Her hair, which had grown back perhaps 2 inches since October, was dressed with 2 of her mother's pearl combs. She did not wear a veil. She had said, when the Conduit Street dressmaker proposed one, that she had never quite liked them, and that a woman who came to her own wedding with her face uncovered was a woman whose face would not be uncovered afterwards either, and that she had had quite enough, for one lifetime, of women uncovering each other in private. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt approved. Bentham, who had walked Lord Ashbourne's daughter into the chapel because Cordelia had asked him, gave her hand to the Duke at the altar with the steady, careful, deeply unceremonial gesture of a man giving an instrument of unusual rarity to its proper keeper. Marcus took her hand. The chaplain spoke. The vows were spoken. The ring went on Cordelia's finger. At the close, in the small chapel with the cold January light coming in through the east window, Marcus turned to Cordelia and said, in a voice not quite low enough for the chaplain to miss, "Lady Ravenholt." "Marcus, welcome to the rest of your life." She laughed once. The Dowager Duchess, in the front pew, laughed almost silently into her glove. Bentham did not laugh, because he did not laugh in chapels, but he allowed himself, very privately, a smile. They came out of the chapel into a thin, clear winter morning. The lawn between the chapel and the house had been swept of leaves. A robin was singing on the corner of the south porch. 3 notes and a 4th. The same phrase Cordelia had walked under in October. She paused, listening, and Marcus paused beside her. "Same bird," she said. "Same bird." "He has learned no new phrases since I left." "He has been waiting for you to come back." They walked together across the lawn and into the house. The Annals of Tacitus, edited by His Grace Marcus Henry Alaric Stanton, Duke of Ravenholt, and Cordelia Anne Ashbourne Stanton, Duchess of Ravenholt, were published in London by Mr. Murray on the 7th of June in the following year. The title page, which had been set under the new Duchess's personal supervision, named both editors equally, in the same point size, side by side. The dedication, which was the only feature of the title page set in italics, read, "To the late Lord Ashbourne of Ashbourne Park, in gratitude for the daughter he made." The book sold 300 copies in the first month. It was reviewed by Lord Sefton in the Quarterly. It was held up at half a dozen Oxford colleges as a model of textual editing. It was bought, anonymously, in May, by a small bookseller in Devon, who entered it onto an account in the name of Lady Marjorie Ashbourne, and who, when his shop boy looked at the entry and queried it, was told only that the customer required a copy of the book privately, and was not to be inquired of further. The new Duchess of Ravenholt, who had received a quiet report of the purchase from her solicitor in Lincoln's Inn the same week, did not comment. She had, by then, a great deal else to do. She had, at Ashbourne Park, restored 7 dismissed servants, opened her father's library to 2 visiting Oxford scholars, planted 30 new pear trees along the south wall of the kitchen garden, and begun, in correspondence with Lord Sefton, the editing of an entirely different Latin author, whose name she had not yet decided to make public. She had, at Berkeley Square, established, with her mother-in-law, a small, unofficial weekly evening. Tuesdays, 8 o'clock, 2 glasses of sherry, 6 women, 1 subject. That would, within 3 years, become the only literary salon in London at which a young woman of unusual learning could be certain of being heard. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenholt, who had been formidable for 61 years before Cordelia came into her house, was found, in her late 70s, to be more formidable still in the role of mother-in-law to a young woman she had decided to like. She had, at home, in the room at Berkeley Square that her husband had set aside as her writing room, and that adjoined his own library by a single connecting door, a door that was, by mutual private arrangement, never fully closed, accumulated a small set of objects on her desk that had not been there before her marriage. 3 pearl combs in a small lacquer box that had belonged to her mother, a copy of the Annals, opened to the title page. A small coil of dark chestnut hair, returned to her by Sarah on the morning of the wedding from the apron pocket in which it had been kept since the 2nd Wednesday of October. A miniature of her father. And on the corner of the desk, in a small porcelain dish, a pair of plain, steel-handled shears. She had brought them down from Ashbourne Park in March, retrieved from the kitchen yard where Mr. Bentham had placed them, cleaned by Sarah, set in the dish by Cordelia herself. They were not, any longer, an instrument of war. They were now, in the perfectly precise arrangement of objects on the desk of the Duchess of Ravenholt, simply a pair of shears for cutting paper. Marcus, who saw the dish on the desk the first morning she set it down, did not comment. She watched him not comment. He came across the room. He stood behind her chair with one hand resting on its back. He kissed the top of her head, where her hair, now nearly 2 inches longer than it had been in October, was already starting to curl. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, very quietly, in the voice he had used in her library at Ashbourne Park on the afternoon they had first met, "You wrote the letter." "I wrote the letter." "I am glad." "So am I." He turned away to his own work. The connecting door stood ajar an inch, exactly an inch, the way it had been ajar an inch every day since the morning after the wedding. The fire spoke quietly to itself on the hearth. Outside, in the small square at the back of the house, a robin began, against all reason, to sing. 3 notes and a 4th, the same phrase, somewhere in late April, in London. Cordelia picked up her pen. The Annals were finished. The next book was waiting. She had grown her hair back almost an inch and a half. She would, in time, grow it back to her shoulders. She would, in time, not grow it back at all. The choice, this time, was hers. She bent her head over the page and began to write.